following podcast is not meant for children or for liberals, even though that's pretty much the same thing these days, but that's what we're here for. Somebody's got to keep these brats in line. Anyway, you've been warned. It's the right opinion.
These days, our media's either incompetent or malevolent. They don't believe in heaven, but they acting like they heaven sent. Knowing the truth is way harder than telling it. We gotta work harder, gotta be more intelligent. Sometimes we just gotta grab a mic and start yelling shit. We're living in times when it's hard to stay relevant. Be the elephant in the room full of elephants. Be the elephant in the room full of elephants. Boom.
Welcome back to The Right Opinion right here on therightopinion.podbean.com. I, of course, am your host, Mr. Harrison Bergeron. Happy to have each and every one of you aboard, as always. Look, guys, we're in lockdown, right? Like that, I have all the time in the world, unfortunately, and could very well be putting out episode after episode after episode. But frankly, I don't want to talk about this all the time, and the narratives are constantly moving. And I don't want to put out shows for the sake of putting out shows. That's something I'm not a huge fan of. I want to put out shows that are meaningful, that have a lot of information that you're not hearing other places, that provide a perspective you're most certainly not hearing on the mainstream media. That's what this show is about. So it's like, yeah, I could go through every day, pick out a few headlines, slap together a 30, 45-minute episode, get it out there, beg for you to share it. But it would be hollow. Like, I don't want you to share these things for the sake of trying to make me famous or trying to get this podcast over or whatever it is. I want you guys to have the information, and I want you to be able to share it with people. Because, again, I know you're not hearing it a lot of places. So here I am giving you the right opinion right here on therightopinion.podbean.com. And also feel free to search for The Right Opinion on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. Also available on hackerhameen.podbean.com and ratsaladreview.com. So all those plugs out of the way. You can follow me on Twitter at RightOpinionPod. You can also follow me on Instagram, Parler, and Minds. Same tag at RightOpinionPod. No spaces, no underscores, no none of that stuff. Nothing fancy. It's just those three words. If you could spell them, you're good. Anyway, so that's pretty much it for my introduction here. I want to start on a relatively serious note here. I am Harrison Bergeron of The Right Opinion Podcast right here at therightopinion.podbean.com. I am calling for a lockdown of New York City, an indefinite lockdown of New York City, until we can pinpoint the morons that are calling for Andrew Cuomo to run for president. These people need to be on some sort of watch list. Now, credit where credit is due. And yes, I am going to give some credit to Andrew Cuomo here because, to his credit, bitching and complaining louder than any other governor is really his job in a time like this. Because basically what's happening now, for those of you unaware, is that the federal government is putting together a relief package. As a matter of fact, it looked like it just passed the Senate. I think it's got to go back to the House. Obviously, it's got to be signed by the president. But if you are a governor right now in a time where the federal government is handing out a bunch of money, it is sort of your job to just complain as loud as humanly possible in hopes that you will get a bigger slice of that money. Now, will he do anything appropriate or effective with it? That remains to be seen. But for now, his job is essentially to bitch and complain and to say that they need stuff, even if they don't necessarily need it in the quantity or in the time frame that he's claiming they need it. That's what he's supposed to do. Other governors are doing this. Some of them have figured out that it's not a good idea to bitch and complain about Donald Trump and then expect for him to give you what you want. But Andrew Cuomo's not the brightest fella. And that's why, I mean, look, his constant complaining, his over-catastrophizing, his incessant flip-flopping on what is actually going on here, I mean, all of that would fit right in with the gaggle of goofs that the Democrats produced as potential presidential nominees. But that ship has sailed. You are stuck with creepy, sleepy, flippy, floppy, sloppy malarkey Joe Biden, okay? You made your bed, now let it sniff you. Okay, so, but Cuomo, you know, he's out here one day talking about how great of how great the federal response has been, and then the next day he's bitching about the number of resources that are being sent to him. So he's made the following claims. Basically, he's saying that New York State needs 30,000 ventilators. Now, this may be true, but that doesn't mean that, they just appear out of thin air because Andrew Cuomo needs them. He's also talking about New York State. He's the governor of the entire state. It's not just the city. Now, I can tell you from third party, second party kind of information that I'm getting from friends that live in the city. I know somebody who had a family member in the hospital recently, unrelated to coronavirus, and obviously, God bless them. I hope everything pans out there. But they were in a hospital during these trying times. And sure enough, they're sending me pictures of an empty waiting room. There's like 3 people in the waiting room there. So the idea that hospitals are being completely overrun, it seemed from this person's account, and this is just one hospital, but it was in Manhattan, so this is the belly of the beast here, is that they always have a little bit of a shortage on resources because you live in the biggest, craziest city in the world, and people tend to come into hospitals more frequently there than other places. I don't think I'm making any real stretches of logic there when I say that. Having said that, they're not completely overwhelmed. They don't have a waiting room. And again, this is just one hospital on one day. Circumstances can shift and vary. I get it. Maybe I just got a peek at something that was not the norm. But the idea, again, that these places are being overrun and that they don't have enough beds and that they don't have enough room and that they have people coming in off the streets. They don't know where to put them all. From what I saw in that specific example, and again, it's a specific example, that is not true. But just having a want for, or even a supposed need for, 30,000 ventilators does not just magically make them appear out of thin air. Now, Trump has enacted the Defense Production Act, which essentially gives the federal government the authority to tell private businesses that they need to manufacture certain goods. Trump has enacted it, allowing kind of an unlocking of certain authorities for the federal government, but he also is working with private companies that they have the infrastructure in place to potentially be able to make things like ventilators, but they're not currently designed to make ventilators because, last week they were making cars or they were making air conditioners. So, yes, he could come in with the full force of the federal government and say, like, you guys got to revamp everything and start making ventilators right away. But rather than putting his boot on their throat and telling them to do as they're told, he's negotiating with them to see what they need in order for them to repurpose their infrastructure in order to be able to produce more masks, more ventilators, more medical equipment. It's not, this is not Nazi Germany. This is not, Cold War era Russia. This is not, a terrorist dictatorship out in the Middle East somewhere. The federal government here, while it does often overexert its power, we have a president in place that's not a huge fan of doing that unless it's absolutely necessary. He also knows that these companies are going to need to, once the ventilators are produced, going to need to turn right back around and start pumping out cars and air conditioners because we need an economy to keep going. So he's trying to work with them to see what he can do. Even Andrew Cuomo has recognized that that while he was initially upset with the president's enactment of the law, of the act, I guess the Defense Production Act, and not going full bore with nationalization of all these sorts of things, he's even taken a step back and said, look, I think the president's doing the right thing here. I understand, my initial reaction was what it was. I think he could be doing a little bit more, but it's a fine line that the guy's got to walk. And when Cuomo's even given him credit on that front, it's something that's worth note because, again, he's not ought to do that all that often, and he doesn't really have any incentive for doing it other than realizing that that Trump, being who he is the type of person that if you are mean to him, he will be mean back to you. If you are nice to him, he will be nice to you. It's really not that difficult of an equation. Is it, in a sense, kissing the ring? Yeah, but that's not any different than any other president that's ever existed before now. It's just that we know the character flaws of our current president so much more because we've known him for so long and we've got to see them on full display because our media, even though they hate him, can't stop covering him. Even though they want to, we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So then Cuomo also makes the statement that they need $3.8 billion just for New York State, never mind the rest of the country. And maybe that's true. But once again, that money, well, I was going to say that money doesn't just appear, but in this case it actually does. Having said that, just because we are producing money that we don't really have, doesn't mean that we should be producing an endless amount of money that we don't really have. It's just negligent not only towards the 95% of people who will be around alive and in desperate need of an economy when this thing is all over. Never mind the future generations getting fucked over in the process here. Now, that brings me to Wednesday, March 25th, when Cuomo, like I said, he's 1 minute he's bitching about the Fed, the other minute he's kissing his ass. It's this level of flip-floppery that, again, maybe it does lead you to believe he could be a good presidential candidate if, in fact, you're a dumbass Democrat. But he did say, I want to thank the president for his cooperation and his team for their cooperation. And he even noted that he's been on the phone regularly with Trump, with Pence, and the, quote, extraordinarily helpful, end quote, Jared Kushner. So he is talking with the White House and their staff with regularity. That's, again, his job. He's doing his job just fine. It's just all of the things that he's doing are in no way presidential. Like the idea that because he's bitching on TV and he's making phone calls, these are your examples of what makes a good president? Because I could tell you that there's about 18 Democrats that could all do all of these things that were on the ballot, on the debate stage at one point or another. And for some reason, you guys didn't seem to think they were capable of bitching about Trump and making a few phone calls. It seems to me that was all they were capable of doing. Why aren't they getting calls for president? Why Andrew Cuomo? It's because they are so blind to what is the stellar leadership of our president and of our federal government right now. And frankly, not a huge fan of the federal government in general, even when my guy's in charge. But they're doing a really good job here. And you know, obviously, I'm probably talking to some of you out there who recently filed for unemployment, lost your jobs, are without an income. I get it, man. Like, no one gets it better than me. I was out of work not too long ago through reasons that really had nothing to do with me either. My job, you know, at the time, this was like about 18 months ago now, they weren't making money. I was making a lot of money. They decided to cut my salary. I mean, that's that. And it really, not only did it have nothing to do with me, but had they listened to some of the things that I had to say along the way, they probably would not have been in that position. But nevertheless, I lost my job. It sucked. Unemployment sucks. Job interviews suck. All of that stuff sucks. And right now, you'd probably, like, even if you hate job interviews the way that I do, you'd probably love to be on one right now. But it's an extremely difficult time to find work. Obviously, places are contracting rather than expanding in a lot of instances, unless you want to go work for Amazon or one of the few companies that are thriving in these trying times. You're kind of out of luck and you're kind of left with unemployment. Now, from what I understand, the relief bill that just went out will actually pay you as much as you were making essentially through unemployment. So file for unemployment as soon as humanly possible. If you're out of work right now, go pause this podcast, go file for unemployment, because every second that you don't file could potentially be costing you money, as I discovered the one time I had to do it. So yeah, go there, file for unemployment, put an accurate number as far as what you were making, and there's a likelihood that you will get pretty much what you were making in unemployment benefits, as opposed to what is usually like 60% or something like that. I think it's like there's a certain dollar number max. Like in Texas, it's like $500 something. I think it was the same here in Jersey, if I'm not mistaken, because I think I was getting the max, and it was like $510 after the taxes were taken out of it. Also a good idea, if you can afford to do so, have them take the taxes out in advance, so that way you're not paying it back at the end of the year when you probably don't have money because you've been spending it as soon as you get it. I get it. I'm not judging. I'm just giving some friendly advice. Anyway, so Cuomo, getting back to him here, you know, all he's doing is complaining. This doesn't make him presidential. If anything, his calls for the nationalization of things, his want for federal dollars, which I'm willing to bet he will spend inefficiently once he gets them anyway, these are not presidential things. If anything, it kind of has exposed his inner communism, which really isn't all that inner, but now it's just out in the open, is that he wants to seize power from private companies. He wants to take a bunch of money. He's looking at this opportunity, which is how he looks at it, as an opportunity for him to flex his governmental muscle. And he wants to obviously put everybody on lockdown, and he's got the military coming in. He wants the army coming in. And I guess that's specific to the city, but still, the idea that we need to wheel military into major cities right now, everyone just stay the fuck home. Like, just stay home. It's not that difficult. We can legitimately save the world by sitting our fat asses on a couch and watching Netflix, do that. And yes, I get it. Some of you are hurting out there. Some of you need work. Some of you need food. Plan ahead. Do these things sparingly, and everybody's going to be okay. The less time, and I had to explain this to my kid, I said the less time you spend outside now means the sooner we will be able to all go outside again. That's the bottom line here, is the sooner that this virus is no longer spreading to people, the sooner we can all go back out. And it's, it's unfortunate that it's a waiting game, that we got to wait at least 2 weeks. I would say at least 4. Getting things open by Easter is optimistic, which is what the president has not called for, but said that he would like to see. He thinks it would be beautiful if we can open everything up by Easter. This obviously sent the media into a tizzy about all of these sorts of things, but I don't know what they want here. Do you want the guy to say that we're never going to open the country back up again? Because that's not good for anybody. That doesn't give anybody hope. That doesn't give anybody a deadline. It doesn't give, we can't see the light at the end of the tunnel if the tunnel just goes on forever and there's no light at the end of it. We need to have some sign of how long we're going to need to do this. And it's also worth note, if you're out there buying food for your household or whatever it is, you want to know how long you need to stock up for. If I knew I needed to stock up for a month, I could stock up for a month, and then I could never leave the house again, and I would be not only not exposed, but not exposing other people. And obviously that logic carries forward to virtually every man, woman, and child in the country right now. So I'm optimistic that things, I'm looking around my community here. I'm not seeing a lot of people interacting. Everybody's doing keep, social distance, stay 6 feet away, yada, yada, yada. So that's great. Keep doing that. Got another couple weeks ahead of us, and then hopefully we can return to life as normal. But getting back to Cuomo here, and rather New York as a whole, I'm ready to lock down the entire state of New York City until we can find these clowns that think Andrew Cuomo needs to be president. I mean, we may need to go door to door on this one or run some sort of internet queries. I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of infiltrating people's private lives, but these folks are dangerous because they're just that stupid. All right, so on a more serious note, guys, Greta might have coronavirus. I know. How will we ever survive? I know. In these trying times, you probably are tempted to turn to a 17-year-old Swedish girl on the spectrum with no medical experience whatsoever to talk you through the disaster that is this widespread virus. My God, who better to speak on this than Greta Thunberg? And, of course, the New York Times to echo her nonsense. So the New York Times prints Greta Thunberg, the 17-year-old Swedish climate activist, announced on Tuesday that she and her father, Svante, had symptoms of COVID-19. And while hers were mild, it is extremely likely that she contracted the virus, end quote. So now she's a doctor. I mean, as usual, this little puppet has no idea what she's talking about, but that doesn't stop the paper of record, the New York Times, from putting her non-qualified medical opinion. So let me get this straight. They will listen to Greta Thunberg's non-qualified medical diagnosis, but when Dr. Fauci or Dr. Burx are saying that Trump is doing everything that he needs to do, that's just nonsense. We're actually going to get to some sound clips from that in a little bit. But, I mean, as usual, not only does she have no idea, but what she's saying is wholly ascientific. She wasn't tested, so she has no idea if she had the COVID-19. The COVID-19, it just sounds like it's like they got the clap. I got the COVID. But she otherwise could have just had mild flu symptoms. As a matter of fact, our Surgeon General had said that of the people being tested in the United States that were showing symptoms, only 1 out of 10 actually tested positive for coronavirus. So actual basic science, if not just basic math, dictates that it is actually highly unlikely that she contracted the disease, but nevertheless, the New York Times prints her, again, non-qualified medical opinion saying that it is extremely likely that she contracted the virus. And the New York Times writes this story of a self-diagnosis from a 17-year-old girl who's on the spectrum and is in no way a doctor. She doesn't even attend high school, from what most of us can tell. So basically, this little sack of dingleberries is missing the spotlight and she needs to make herself the center of attention, and or the media realizes that they're losing the battle of narratives, so they tapped their favorite brainwashed puppet, Greta Thunberg, to come in here. And, I mean, she'll be singing a goddamn duet with Big Bird about coughing into your elbow by the end of the month. I'm sure of it. I mean, at this point, why wouldn't they? It's not like they have actual arguments to back up their temper tantrums. They just have more emotions, so they'll throw the 17-year-old climate activist on television, and hopefully you'll get a little sad that poor Greta's got mild flu symptoms. Oh no! Oh my God, she can't go around the world spreading her bullshit about climate science anymore. How will we ever get by? I'm honestly, I'm taken aback by this, guys. Anyway, let's move on from one clueless idiot to an older clueless idiot. Her name is, of course, Nancy Pelosi, who, her last-minute shoehorn of things into this bill are nothing short of ridiculous, right? Like, she is very much subscribing to the never let a good crisis go to waste. Obviously, that is a quote from Rahm Emanuel, former chief of staff for the Obama White House, and I believe former mayor of Chicago. But he was saying never let a good crisis go to waste way back in the day. Sure enough, he was recently quoted as saying the same thing about the coronavirus, and clearly Nancy Pelosi subscribing to this Rahm Emanuel, Saul Alinsky methodology here of taking times of peril and using it for political gain. Now, worth note here, before I drill too hard into Nancy, is that Rand Paul, current coronavirus patient, had tried to do some of this stuff as well. But in his defense, and not just because I'm a big fan of Rand, I like that he stands by his opinions, his objections to the original bill, A, he wanted to pull all military out of Afghanistan, and B, wanted to make sure that people claiming benefits from this bill have a social security number. Now, both of those things, as far as I'm concerned, actually help the effort, right? Is that if we pulled all of our military out of Afghanistan, now you've got a lot less money being wasted over there that could be spent on the relief. We also have more bodies in place. So there's medics, obviously, that are over there. We can use some of those over here right now. There's a lot of things that we can use that are being wasted fighting a never-ending regime change war that's been going on for the better part of 2 decades now. Maybe, let's pull that all back. We've got shit going on here. I've always said we need some us time, some me time here in the U.S. We can't just be willy-nilly wasting resources all over the world when we've got people here who are dying and people who are hurting in an economy that needs bolstering. So, I like that idea from Rand. However, it's a little extreme. It opens up a whole different debate in a time where answers need to be streamlined so that this whole process can be fast-tracked and that aid can be provided to the American people. It reeks of politics, and because I'm about to get on Nancy Pelosi for doing this, I gotta, slap Rand Paul on the wrist as well here, is that this is not the time for politics. Having said that, the other thing that he pointed out there is that he wants people claiming benefits to have a social security number. Yes. We shouldn't be giving out benefits to people that aren't citizens, that aren't at least here legally in some way, shape, or form. There are a fair amount of illegals that have social security numbers. Whether or not they're willing to roll the dice on getting caught by submitting paperwork is entirely up to them. But I think that one makes a lot of sense, is that if we're going to be handing out a bunch of money, let's make sure that the money that we're handing out goes to the people that it's supposed to go to, the people that paid into the system, the people that have a right to be here, and the people that the government should be worried about first and foremost, their people. But Nancy Pelosi, my God, is she determined not to let this crisis go to waste. Here are some of the things that she tried to shoehorn into this bill at the last minute, some of which did ultimately end up in the bill that was approved by the Senate, because at a certain point, the Senate's got to throw their hands up and go, all right, we need this bill done. Like, we need to get this out to the American people. Unfortunately, we are going to have to deal with a certain level of pork. But in the time of a medical crisis, of a pandemic, these are the things that Nancy Pelosi thought were good ideas to shoehorn into this bill. The Minority Bank Deposit Program, a program designed to expand the use of minority banks and credit unions. A noble cause. Don't see what role government should be playing in that. Don't at all see how that relates to the pandemic. Moving on, funding to stop violence against women. Again, noble cause, has nothing to do with the pandemic. And by the way, she wanted to fund this stopping of violence against women to the tune of $300 million. Moving on from there, we also had $35 million going to the Kennedy Center. Was the Kennedy Center being used as a quarantine zone? Did they, other than maybe some lack of tourism, did they see any real hit from all of this? Are they exempt from other forms of aid, and that's why this money is being passed specifically to them? Is $35 million not an excessive amount of money to give to a program or to a center that really doesn't have, again, anything to do with this pandemic? I think so. I don't know. Moving on, $90 million for AIDS research, because that's the problem right now, obviously, right? Is that we're having that big AIDS pandemic. Oh, no, it's COVID-19. It's the Wu flu. It's the Wuhan virus. I don't see how that fits into anything. Moving on, starts to get slowly more ridiculous. Financial Literacy Education Commission Emergency Response. This is a program that would place special emphasis on providing an additional set of tools geared towards women, racial and ethnic minorities, veterans, disabled, and LGBTQ communities. First and foremost, why are we assuming that all those people need help in that field? Secondly, why wouldn't we help everybody who needs help in that field? Third of all, what the fuck does that have to do with coronavirus? Nothing, obviously. So moving on, they also wanted to protect collective bargaining for federal unions. This one's a doozy. The airline carbon emissions reporting. So first, what they would like to do is any airline that's taking any federal money, any federal relief money here, they want the federal government shall require each air carrier receiving assistance to fully offset the annual carbon emissions of such air carriers for domestic flights beginning in 2025. So they want, this is Green New Deal shit. They want, emissions-free air travel by 2025. It's a noble thought. Does that just magically happen because you put it in a bill? I don't think so. I'm pretty sure that's not how that works. And then it gets even worse from there, is that by January 1 of 2023, air carriers will have to present passengers with, quote, information regarding greenhouse gas emissions resulting from each individual flight, end quote. So you'll get your ticket, it'll have your seat number, it'll have your row number, it'll have, the time of the flight, and then it will have at the bottom, I would hope at the bottom, it would be a listing of exactly the number of greenhouse gas emissions that you taking this flight have released into the atmosphere, because that's the sort of thing that airlines need to be worried about, right? I don't understand. You're going to give these people money. Obviously, I mean, this is the government, and this is the Democrats. They want, if they're going to give you any sort of money, they need to have a say in what you're doing. And while that does kind of make sense to a certain extent, this sort of thing is not the sort of thing that we should be telling these companies to do. We should be telling these companies, you can't do stock buybacks. You can't lay off all these people and take all this sort of money. That's the sort of stuff that makes sense when you're going to put it into a bill. Not telling them that they need to live up to your cockamamie Green New Deal standards. That's insane. And again, has nothing to do with the active pandemic. A couple more things here. They also tried to shoehorn a $15 minimum wage into all of this, which, by the way, Nancy, would only cause higher unemployment right now. But nice try. I mean, right now you've got, I think in the last week, 3.3 million people filed for unemployment. If employers had to pay everybody a minimum of $15 an hour, we're looking at more like 4 to 5 million people going on unemployment, because companies are just not going to pay you $15 an hour to flip burgers, to take orders, to make coffees. It's insane to suggest that you are worth that kind of money if that's all you're doing. Anyway, last but not least, there are 60 pages on elections. Yeah, because that has everything to do with the growing pandemic right now. Some of the things in here would include all states being forced to adapt ballot harvesting, early voting, and no excuse absentee ballots. So the people who are always telling you that Trump and the Republicans aren't worried about election integrity and they're committing voter fraud, they're literally putting things in place that make voter fraud that much easier. Ballot harvesting, which for those of you who don't know, is that you know obviously people can mail in their ballots under certain circumstances. Ballot harvesting is basically, if you don't want to go take it to the post office, somebody will come around, collect your ballot, and take all of them to the post office. The issue there is that the chain of custody has been broken, And now some rando who's just collecting your ballot can look at it and go, oh, he voted for Trump, huh? Ship! And just rip that thing right in half, throw it in the garbage. You'll never know. And they'll obviously never be held accountable, because how would we know? So ballot harvesting, and then to take that and add no excuse absentee ballots means that there's more ballots to harvest, because if you don't even need an excuse to get a ballot to vote from home. And early voting, which is just, as we've seen in the primaries, has not been very effective in getting any actual positive results out of it, is that we had half of California still voting for people who had dropped out of the state already because the early vote, or dropped out of the race already because the early voting took place so far in advance that they voted for Pete Buttigieg, and of course he dropped out a week before the California primary. So election integrity on one hand, doing everything they can to fuck up election integrity on the other. Don't look at the left hand, look at the right hand. Look at the right hand, don't look at the left hand. It's like sleight of hand, except they're not very good at it. And for some reason, people buy into all this. Meanwhile, all of this nonsense is designed to do one of two things. Obviously, there was a bill on the table, looked like everybody was on board. Nancy Pelosi came in, shoehorned all this stuff in here. Why? Well, like I said, one of two reasons. The Dems can make all of their dreams come true in a time of crisis, is that, oh my God, the Republicans are going to have to get onto this bill because the people need help, and then we're going to bitch and scream that the Republicans aren't doing enough if we don't get this bill through. So let's put as much of our liberal Green New Deal communist bullshit into this bill as humanly possible, and maybe the Republicans will just sign it or pass it, and then Trump will just sign it. That's one. Number two is that this bill falls flat, and then the Democrats can point to Trump and the GOP and be like, oh, look at you guys, you're not doing anything to help the American people. Either way, they're definitely not to blame. It's definitely not Nancy and the Democrats' fault. Definitely not. No matter the outcome, it is definitely Trump's fault. Even if if Trump got coronavirus and God forbid died tomorrow, they'd still be blaming him for shit for the next 10 years. Like, it's just unbelievable that they will never, ever take any blame. When this is as clear as day, right? Like I said, I got on Rand Paul for doing it too, but Nancy Pelosi held on to the original bill over the weekend so that the media can bitch about how McConnell's not doing anything, when if McConnell had been there all weekend, he would have still been able to do precisely nothing, because Nancy likes holding on to things longer than are necessary. And those things always seem to be of such great importance, right? The impeachment was the most important thing going on in America. She held on to that bill for 40 days, or the articles of impeachment for 40 days. This time around, the American people need relief. What does she do? She gets a bill through the House and then holds on to it for a weekend so that we can all bitch about Cocaine Mitch. The Democrats love themselves almost as much as they hate you. We'll get into a little bit more of that in a little while, but I think it's pretty clear if you've been watching the news that this is obviously all designed to make Trump look like he's doing a terrible job with this, and it doesn't appear that that's actually the case. I mean, the reality is that there's no real perfect way to handle any of this, but we appear to be handling this as well as virtually any other country. We're certainly doing a better job than Italy or Iran or China, even South Korea. We've managed to pass them as far as the testing goes. So we are now testing more people per day than any other country, according to the statistics that I'm seeing. And we have more private companies producing more tests, making more supplies, getting more things out to hospitals and doctors' offices on a daily basis. As usual, America always triumphs, and we always seem to find a way to get out ahead of this. And, it may have taken a little while to get us off the ground. A lot of that may have had to do with actions of previous administrations, frankly, that supposedly, and I don't know this to be 100%, but I did hear this on a couple different places, is that there was a reserve of medical masks that the government had, but it was depleted during the H1N1 outbreak under Obama and never refilled. So all of those masks that we could have had and should have been replenished and would have been able to go out to hospitals right away, we wouldn't have had to worry about producing more of them. Unfortunately, those things weren't available because the previous administration depleted them and never refilled them. Also, if only we had a president, by the way, who was talking about how we are too heavily reliant on China. a president whose vice president wasn't having his son over there making billion-dollar deals. The current president, of course, has been on China since day one of his campaign. He's been all over China. He's been telling us that we need to be less reliant on them. He's been telling us that the supply chains are ultimately going to cause us some sort of problems because we are so reliant on them. And here we are, where all of the masks, all of the medicines, all that stuff is made over there. We don't have access to it because they're not giving it to us. And we have, obviously, travel restrictions in place. But we're back on the road here. We're back on the rails. We've got everything working at maximum efficiency from what I can tell right now. Like I said, we're producing more masks, producing more ventilators. Lockdowns are in place where they need to be. But ultimately, our president, look, he's trying to be optimistic. He's trying to provide us hope. He's trying to let us know that this is going to be weeks, not months. And if it has anything, obviously it does come down to his say-so. But unless the doctors tell him otherwise, he is going to reopen this country as soon as he possibly can. And the Democrats are obviously not helping with that at all. As a matter of fact, they're actively sabotaging this man's attempts to keep us safe without being the tyrannical dictator that they all said he would be in times like this. So look, he's got innumerable powers in these extreme circumstances. He could enact all of them. But we don't live in a country where the president dictates every friggin' move we make and every breath we take and every meal we eat. This is not the case. This is not the world that we live in. And even under the most extreme circumstances in this country's history, we have never truly been that way, at least in modern history. I can't even think back far enough to where it would make sense to even compare it to today. So here is an example of the Democrats, saying the quiet part out loud because they've been so brash and their media buddies will cover for them that they don't know when to lie anymore. Here is my actual representative in the House. Her name is Mikey Sherrill. She represents the 11th District here in the great state of New Jersey. And she's talking to some of her colleagues, some of her constituents about what's going on. And she lets it out of the bag that some of her colleagues are actively tanking the relief efforts to make sure that Trump doesn't get a win, which would, by the way, probably be a win for you in a time where you need money, you need an economy to be thriving, you're losing retirement money, maybe you're losing your job, maybe you have minimal food in the pantry and not a lot of money coming in the first place. These are wins for you, but Mikey Sherrill and her buddies, the Democrats in Congress, specifically in the House, don't want to give Trump a win, even if it means making your life more miserable. Here is Miss Sherrill now.
And it's shockingly a different mindset. So when I go, I've gone up to people and said, I need to get this piece of legislation passed. And they say, oh yeah, we just passed it. I said, yeah, we just passed it. I need the Senate to pass it, and I need the president to sign it. And they said, well, we don't want to give the president a win.
All right, so the audio is it's a little tight there at the end, but I just wanted to kind of reiterate what she's saying is that she's talking about she's in the House. They pass bills. Those bills go to the Senate. If that bill gets passed there, it goes to the desk of the president. He signs it. This is a tactic that the Democrats do all the time. And I'm actually not accusing Mikey of doing it here because it sounds like she's actually got some good intentions. And I'm not saying that because she's just from my state. She's a Democrat, and I dislike her as much as I like the rest of them. But she is, she's saying that they're passing bills in the House, and those bills need to go on to the next couple of phases in order for those bills to actually do anything. But this is the Democratic trick, is that they have control of the House. So they pass a bunch of bullshit that they know will never get through the Senate and will never get the signature of the president, so that they could sit back and go, we've passed 200 bills, and these are bipartisan bills, because, they convinced like Susan Collins to vote for one of them. And then they go, Mitch McConnell's not doing anything with them. It's, yeah, because Mitch McConnell's never, ever going to put these bills up for vote because he knows his party, he knows his constituents, and he knows that this stuff is never going to pass. Maybe instead of passing as many stupid bills as you possibly can, pass a single good bill, and that will get passed. But as Mikey Sherrill unveils there, not that we needed to be told this, but once in a blue moon, they actually do say the quiet part out loud, and it's important for us to focus on it, is that they pass the bill, and she's trying to get them moved on to the next phases because it sounds like she's genuinely trying to get these things done. And then her colleagues go, yeah, but then this is going to be a win for Trump, so we can't really do that. Well, what the fuck is that supposed to mean? And by the way, if this is your ideology, do not come bitching in 2020 about, oh, Trump didn't get anything done. First and foremost, he's gotten more done in the last 3 years than virtually any president in my lifetime, if not well beyond that. Second of all, he's gotten all that done despite your never-ending attempt to impeach him, to get him thrown out of office, to have him be labeled a sexual assaultist, and all of these other things that they've lobbed at him. And, like I said, they've tried to impeach him, and they fought him tooth and nail on every bill in the House, and all of the media attention, and all of Hollywood, and big tech censoring his followers and his loudest supporters, all of that, and he's still gotten all this stuff done. So maybe if you were a little less focused on not giving Trump wins, which he seems to find whether or not you were attempting to keep him from said wins, maybe if you actually just tried to give the American people a win, everybody wins, including you, and yes, unfortunately for you, also including Trump. Anyway, so speaking of Trump, how's my boy doing on all this sort of stuff, right? Everybody's like, how's your boy doing? My boy's doing just fine. And I'm going to give you, not my opinion, even though it is the right opinion, but my right opinion is based largely on the facts and the data and the experts. So here are a few sound clips. We're going to start off with number one, Dr. Anthony Fauci. He has been the tip of the spear on this entire administration response. He's also not been muzzled, as you're about to hear, because he's speaking on an actual interview on actual television, and he's been doing this long before Trump got there. He's been doing this since the Reagan administration. He did it for Democrats. He did it for Republicans. He's doing it now. He is the guy, and Trump is listening to him, as you're about to hear.
Presented to the president, and he asks a lot of questions. That's his nature. He's constantly asking you questions. And I never, in the multiple times that I've done that, where I said, for scientific reasons, we really should do this, that he hasn't said, let's do it. Or when he's when he suggests, why don't we do this? And I say, no, that's really not a good idea from a scientific standpoint. He has never overruled me.
He has never overruled him. So this is the guy. This is the immunologist. This is the expert of experts. This is the guy that our country has been calling upon to fix these sorts of situations for decades, for virtually the entirety of my life. He has never been overruled by Trump when it comes to the science. If that's not enough for you, by the way, I happened to just look it up while that sound clip was playing there, is that the Obama administration not replenishing the masks after the H1N1 outbreak was reported by both Bloomberg and the LA Times. So this is not right-wing outlets that are being out there. These are verified statements made by professionals in and around the administration that are pointing out now that the Trump administration was left at a disadvantage by the previous administration, in addition to a lot of the regulations that needed to be lifted by this administration that were put in place under the previous one, like certain approvals that need to be taking place for certain medical supplies from the FDA and from all these other things, is that basically we're waiving those. We need things now. We don't have time for people to be checking and regulating in times of extreme need. Having bad masks is better than having no masks, at the end of the day. Not to suggest that the masks that are being produced are anything less than whatever the standard may be, but as far as the testing goes and all that sort of stuff, there was a lot of red tape. Trump cut through all of it because we need help now. So that was Fauci. And then let's get into Dr. Deborah Burks, another one of the doctors, actual doctors with actual medical background, talking about Trump's response to this. Here is Dr. Burks. Take it away.
How would you describe the job President Trump is doing behind the scenes and in front of the cameras during these daily briefings that we're seeing? What's been your perspective, Dr. Burks?
He's been so attentive to the scientific literature and the details and the data. And I think his ability to analyze and integrate data that comes out of his long history in business has really been a real benefit during these discussions about medical issues. Because in the end, data is data, and he understands the importance of the granularity. And I think he's been really excited about finding the level of detail that we've been able to now bring over the last few weeks to really understand who's at the greatest risk for severe illness, who will have mild and less and asymptomatic disease, and really calling on every American to do that social distancing, because some people may not know they're actually infected and be unknowingly spreading the virus. And that all comes from the president seeing the data and then really directing these policies and these guidelines that go out to the American people.
I know. Harrison, these are people that are on Trump's team. Obviously, they're going to say he's doing a great job, right? Well, why would they do that? These are medical professionals. They have reputations. They have facts and data in front of them. And they're telling you flat out that Trump is listening to them when they are presenting him with the data. If he wasn't, they would say so because they would know that he's putting American lives in danger. But he's not, so they're not, and here we are. So, okay, these guys are on Trump's team. Let's go to somebody outside of Trump's team. How about the World Health Organization General Director? He's got a very long, complicated name. I'm not going to go ahead and try to pronounce it here, but I will take his quote and play it for you now.
Fighting this pandemic needs political commitment, and commitment at the highest level possible. And the president's commitment, you have already seen it, and the world have seen it. And that kind of leadership is very, very important, the whole of government approach.
The whole of government approach. That's what Trump's been doing. He's actually gone beyond that. He's not only a whole of government approach, but it's a whole of country approach. We have the private sector heavily involved in this because they're the people that are actually going to get things done. They're the people that have every bit of motivation to get things done sooner rather than later so that they can go back to resuming their regular old business, which, unlike the government, doesn't involve them taking people's money for nothing in return. They actually have to provide goods and services in order to get people's money, and they want to get back to that as soon as possible. So having Walgreens, Walmart, CVS, the car companies, whoever it is that is doing something different than what they're normally doing, they are far more motivated to get back to the status quo than the government is in general, and certainly more motivated than the Democrat half of the government is, because as far as they're concerned, this could drag on forever, and as long as it drags on until November so that they can use this to oust Trump, they will be fine with whatever loss of life occurs. Make no mistake about it. So according to all the experts, everything is under control, or at least as under control as it can be. Again, there is no perfect way to solve this problem here, is that regardless, there will be some loss of life, there will be loss of wealth, there will be loss of comfort, there will be loss of freedom, unfortunately, as a result of all of this. But it's all being handled according to the experts. It's being done by the books. It's being done in accordance with the facts, the data, the science, the numbers, the things that actually matter, not the emotions of the losers in the media. Anyway, so getting back on track here, the media, you could tell, are just losing this battle, in addition to the fact that the polling is coming in, that the American people feel that Trump is doing a good job with all of this sort of stuff. You have members of the mainstream media, including Roswell Rachel of MSNBC. That's Rachel Maddow. She'll be crying again in November, and I'm looking forward to it. But they are just, they've lost all touch with reality. They want, many of them in the media are calling for their platforms, their media outlets, to stop covering the White House press briefings because they don't want to be, quote, complicit in the propaganda, end quote. That is definitely a quote I heard somewhere along the lines. And these noble journalists and their want for truth that they just rediscovered in the last 5 minutes. I mean, the problem is that the muscle has atrophied. They have been so disinterested in the truth for so long now that I don't know that they're even capable of deciphering the truth from the fog of their own bullshit biases that they happen to have. And you know how I know that they've completely lost touch with reality? Is that here they are calling for this. They don't want the White House press briefings to be covered. And I'll talk about the importance of those in just a second. But you know who agrees with our media? The Chinese Foreign Ministry. Yes, the Chinese Foreign Ministry. The foreign ministry of the evil Chinese Communist government is retweeting articles from the Washington Post written by Margaret Sullivan that talk about how the media needs to stop doing the live coverage of these White House pressers. Now, the White House pressers are invaluable to the American people right now. Okay, this is a direct, live, in real-time feed of information being given to you, to me, to us. And our intellectual superiors in the media want to run all of whatever Trump and his team are saying through the filter of their wholly indoctrinated lens to make sure that you get, quote, the real truth, because you're not getting the truth from the doctors and the experts. No, you're going to get them from Fredo Cuomo, from Brian Stelter, from Chuck Todd, from Rachel Maddow. These are the people you need to be listening to in these times of crisis, with all of their expertise in virology and immunology and epidemiology. Those are the ones, the journalism majors from the Ivy League schools that look down their nose at you. These are the people that you need to be paying attention to. And I think, and I hope, that hopefully this will once and for all expose the media when we resume life again, and when people realize that the media's alarmism caused a lot of the unwarranted hysteria, and when people come to grips with the fact that our media is bought and paid for by their Chinese communist overlords, hopefully people will pause before believing everything that comes out of the mouth of Roswell, Rachel, and Fredo Cuomo. And for that matter, these people should all be looking in the mirror right now, but they're incapable of doing so because they can't even look themselves in the eye because they know they're that full of shit. But these people need to take a real hard look at why people aren't believing their hysteria about all this sort of stuff. They talk about Fox News is putting people in danger by giving them hope and telling them that things aren't as bad as they actually are. Well, people are turning to Fox News because MSNBC, CNN, ABC News, CBS, Washington Post, New York Times, all of these outlets, Yahoo News, they've been spewing nothing but nonsense, factual, complete and utter, some of which never gets retracted nonsense. Then, when they have an actual crisis on their hands and people need actual information, they're astonished that people are going elsewhere. Shame on them. But they have no shame, so I guess that's sort of not all that effective. Meanwhile, like I said, Trump's listening to the experts when it comes to the science, but he's focused on the economy because that is still very, very important. People think that it's callous to worry about the economy, but 95% of us will be just fine on the other end of all this, and we will need an economy to come back to because we need jobs, we need to put food on our table for our families, and that doesn't happen without a strong economy. Never mind the loss of retirement, the funds that have been, that have just disappeared in the last couple of weeks because of the economy crashing. Luckily, there were some instances in the bill where they, if you're 72 and you're required to take a distribution from your IRA or 401k or whatever it is, you don't have to do that now. So you can keep it in the market, hopefully catch the wave on the way back up, and it won't ultimately affect, hopefully, your retirement long term in the way that it would if you had to take out money right now. So people die. It happens. It's unfortunate. It sounds callous, but there are people are going to die as a result of this. Trump has said that the loss of one life is too much, but obviously, as much as I love him, and I kind of believe him, I don't think he wants anyone to die from any of this, obviously, why would he? But at the end of the day, is that, do we shut down the entire economy because one life could be lost? Do we shut down the entire economy because 100 lives can be lost? Where is the number exactly where it's okay for us to shut down the economy altogether? I mean, certainly it would be silly for us to shut down the economy of 330 million people because one person was going to die. When does it become less silly? 100 people, 1,000 people, 10,000 people? At a certain point, yes, the vast majority of us are touched by the virus, but that's not the case here. Even if we are, many of us will be very, very much fine on the other end of this. 95% of us won't even have serious conditions. If 100% of us got this tomorrow, we're still looking at 95% of people are going to be just fine on the other end of it, and 100% of us aren't getting it, as we can tell right now. Let's look at some numbers, because I think it's important. People die if the economy crashes, right? Everyone's, it's so callous to think about, if the economy crashes. Let's think about all the people that are going to starve to death, be out of homes, all of that sort of stuff if the economy crashes. Let's look at the Great Depression. Some 40,000 people committed suicide during the Great Depression, and those were people that weren't on a variety of mood-altering drugs like we are today for the most part. 40,000 people is enough dead for the libs to call for them to take all of our guns, even though that number is grossly inflated and misrepresented. But what if 40,000 people committed suicide tomorrow? And by the way, that was in a country that had a far lesser population than we have today. So we can only assume that that number will go up. And that's 40,000 people that committed suicide, not people that were starved to death or killed in the commission of a crime. And as we know, crime tends to be more popular when people are struggling with poverty. Will some lives be lost? Yes, absolutely, no matter what we do. Can we protect everyone from everything? No, we cannot. We still need an economy to keep our nation afloat, to give us jobs, to put food on the table. All of that doesn't happen without a strong economy here in the U.S. The unemployment numbers will stay where they are. Businesses will close. There will ultimately be a demand for them, but it won't be the small mom and pop shops that end up revamping themselves and coming back in, unless, of course, they take advantage of some of the loan guarantees that are being presented in this new bill, and hopefully that all passes. And one of the things that I saw, which was great, Ted Cruz was talking about this, is that the new bill will give an interest-free loan to small business owners up to $10 million, but as long as they are continuing to pay their employees and a bulk of that money is going back into payroll, or at least payroll is being covered by that money, a certain percentage of that will be forgiven, if not entirely forgiven. So you can get your money, you can continue to pay your business, continue to pay your bills, continue to pay your employees, and as long as you don't lay off everybody, that loan will ultimately be forgiven, or at least a substantial portion of it. That's great. That's a great idea. It obviously, I'm not a huge fan of just the endless printing of money, but again, I don't know that there's a much better solution right now. And this is very different than, let's say, TARP, for instance. This is not a stimulus package that's needed because the banks made a bunch of really bad decisions. They weren't worried about their downside because the federal government would come in and save them. That's not what this is. This is actually the government causing the problem here. If you had a business, the government said you can no longer do business, and for that, the government owes you. One of the few instances where I'm okay with the government taking care of you, because in this instance, the government caused the problem. This is not, again, the bad decisions of banks giving out loans to people they knew couldn't pay them. This is the government saying, your business is shut down, you're not going to be able to do business, and so the government should right that wrong, which isn't necessarily wrong at the end of the day. As we know, the social distancing will work, as we've seen in other countries, and inevitably we will be over all this, and we still need jobs to go back to, and Trump is doing everything he can to not only, and yeah, like I always say, attribute the worst possible motives to him, that he wants to get reelected. He wants the economy to look good because he knows that that will guarantee his reelection. Sure, all of that's true probably, but that still doesn't mean that it's a bad result for us because he has, less than pure motives in all of this. So, getting back to, can we protect everybody from everything? No. Obviously, we cannot. But worth note here is that some doctors are saying that the fatality rates are much lower than the current models predict, which is something that if you've been listening to me here, I told you would happen. Stanford doctors did a test that would suggest that because of the actual exposure rate, because this is so contagious, that there are innumerable cases out there that are not being reported because people aren't showing any symptoms, or they're showing such mild symptoms that they think they just have a regular flu, or they're not concerned that they have the coronavirus. Even like I said before, the Surgeon General said that people with symptoms are still only testing 1 out of every 10 actually have the coronavirus. So it's flu season. A lot of people have regular old flus that aren't the Wuhan flu. And as a result, it looks like the fatality numbers that are out there are grossly exaggerated because we're only taking the number of deaths in comparison to the number of cases that have been proven. So people who have tested positive. Meanwhile, there are probably scores of people out there that will never be tested and that will never know whether or not they had it, and they're just fine Because again, like I said in previous weeks, if people were just dropping dead from flu-like symptoms, we would start counting those as deaths related to the coronavirus, or we would test those people post-mortem, and we would ultimately get those numbers added on there. The percentage of deaths are going to go down as testing increases. This is not me making any sort of rash assumptions. This is just basic logic that as we discover more people have this who didn't previously even know that they had it, the number of cases will rise, the number of deaths will remain basically where they are, and that means that that percentage will continue to fall as we go on with all this sort of stuff. But let's take a look at some similar things that could kill you that the government could potentially keep you safe from. But I ask you, and I will ask you repeatedly throughout this segment here, is this the world that you want to live in? According to U.S. News, here are just some of the top 10 causes of death in the country and how I think they could be prevented. Suicide. 48,344 people killed themselves in 2018. Now, this means if we wanted to stop this, right, we can take all medicines away from people, we can take all sharp objects away from people, guns, tall buildings, ropes, stools, any mechanism that you could use to kill yourself. Water, yeah, you can't have a bath that's like too deep anymore. We can put regulations on all of this stuff, prevent all of those deaths. But do you really want to live in a world where the government infringes upon every single decision that you make? And let's move on to another one here. Influenza and pneumonia killed 59,120 people in 2018. Well, I guess we better self-quarantine every flu season then for several weeks, if not months. Are you willing to do that? Because we could prevent all 59,000 of these deaths if we did exactly what we're doing this year, every year. Are you willing to live in a world where that's incumbent upon you, is that you have to live inside for 6 to 8 weeks every year because of the flu season? I didn't think so. Moving on from there, diabetes. 84,946 deaths in 2018. That accounts for 3% of all deaths in the United States. Well, I mean, I guess we better elect Bloomberg so that he could take away anything that has sugar in it. Are you willing to go through life with the government dictating everything that you eat and drink? Because, yeah, I mean, we could prevent all of these deaths if we just got rid of sugar tomorrow. Are you ready to get rid of sugar tomorrow? Again, I didn't think so. Moving on, accidents and unintentional injuries accounted for 167,127 deaths. That is 5.9% of all deaths in the United States in 2018. Well, I guess we just have to wrap everybody in bubble wrap and stop allowing people to work dangerous jobs. We need to get rid of all ladders, all cars, all drugs, etc. And again, is that the world that you want to live in? Because we could do that. We could do that tomorrow. We could pass laws that prevent all of these things from ever potentially happening, but you'll basically be sitting in the corner in the fetal position in your apartment for the rest of your life. Moving on from there, cancer. 599,274 deaths, accounting for 21.1% of all deaths in 2018. Well, I guess we better take away all cigarettes, all alcohol, cell phones, microwaves, etc. I mean, any of those things out there presented a chance that you could end up getting cancer. We got to get rid of all those now, right? Yeah, I didn't think so either. There you go. Last but not least, heart disease, 655,381 deaths, accounting for 23.1% of all deaths in 2018. Well, I guess we got to get rid of all fatty foods, all carbs. Let's institute mandatory exercise like it's Oceania up in this bitch. There's no reason why we couldn't prevent all 655,001 of these deaths. If the government were to come in and take every decision away from you, we could prevent a lot of those. Are we ready to do that? I didn't think so. And so I'm just about done here for the week. I do want to play one more clip for you because I love this clip so much. This is Senator John Kennedy, no relation to my knowledge, talking about just how stupid the people who run our country truly are. And he's specifically talking about the people in the Senate here, so rest assured, I don't think he's taking a jab at the Donald. But nevertheless, this could probably apply to any point in time, any Congress, any Senate, most presidents. Just go ahead and take Mr. Kennedy's word for it. Here he is.
What the American people are thinking right now, they're thinking that the brain is an amazing organ It starts working in a mother's womb, and it doesn't stop working until you get elected to Congress. You know what the American people are thinking right now, Mr. President? They're thinking that this country was founded by geniuses, but it's being run by a bunch of idiots. You know what the American people are thinking right now, Mr. President? They're thinking, why do the members of the United States Senate continue to double down on stupid?
Wonderful. We need more of that. Thank you, Senator Kennedy. And I got to give him bonus points for fitting a little bit of the pro-life agenda in there. It starts in a mother's womb. Magnificent. Mwah. Like just the chef's kiss for you, Mr. Kennedy. Thank you. Kennedy. My wrestling fans will get that reference. Anyway, I'm pretty much done for the week here. I hope I was informative. I hope I gave you guys some perspective that you're not hearing elsewhere. That's the intention of this program. I, of course, have been your host, Harrison Bergeron. I encourage you guys to follow me on Twitter at RightOpinionPod. You can also follow me on Parler, Instagram, and Minds. You can check out the shop. I got a link in the show notes there. Got a few t-shirts up there. Things that are, I got a logo tee. I got a couple other rando ones. If you're a right-winger, you're looking for some shirts. And if you, better yet, you have any ideas for shirts, like shoot them at me. I can make them pretty quickly and get them up onto this website. So let me know at RightOpinionPod on Twitter, or you can email the show, therightopinionpod@gmail.com. And that's just about it. Be sure to check out the show at hackerhami.podbean.com or ratsaladreview.com. Maybe both. Like, hey, if you're going to listen to it twice, maybe 3 times, listen to it everywhere you can listen to it. Spread the love around so that everybody gets a little bit of those clicks that we all so desperately need. And it is important for me, before I let you go, to remind you that opinions are like assholes. Everybody's got one, but this asshole has the right opinion right here on therightopinion.podbean.com. I have been your host, Harrison Bergeron, and I will talk to you guys next time. Peace.
Be the elephant in the room full of elephants. Be the elephant in the room full of elephants. Boom.